Lie down, honey. Gracie, lie down.
Look at that. He's got his dog with him. Hello, brains, and welcome to On the Edge with April Mahoney. Here, this is the place where the conversation is pointed, the guests are sharp, and the responses are never dull. Today, this is one of my, I know I shouldn't say this, one of my favorite guests. Yeah, he's amazing. You would be surprised what you will find surfing the internet, and I found a jewel. This is Jay Westbrook. He is a grief recovery specialist, an author, a palliative and hospice care provider, registered nurse, sexual abuse survivor, and a former alcoholic addict. That is built, is what he told me, to suffer and is willing to help us take the wheel when we're spiraling out of control, dealing with death and death-related issues. You know, my mama always says, folks always want to get to heaven, but they don't want to die. And what happens to the people that are left behind, the people that are surviving? You know, are there things that you didn't say that you wish you had said? Are there experiences that you had? Are you still suffering with grief? Do you have survivor's grief? Are you still angry? Do you not understand? Do you feel victimized? What do we say to children? Well, we're going to talk to Jay about that and then some, because there's a lot of unanswered questions in the transition. I know that he's helping me. I'm struggling with something personally, and he just put his arms around me and had a 20-minute conversation, and it really changed the trajectory of how I'm feeling and what I'm doing. So if you are in a quandary and you have any of the things that I outlined, reach out to a grief counselor or a grief recovery specialist, because that's what they do. That's what they're dedicating their life, is to help us take the wheel when we're spiraling out of control. Brains, help me welcome our guest today, Mr. Jay Westbrook. Hello, how are you, handsome?
I'm blessed, and it's so wonderful to be here with you.
I'm so glad that you're here, because there's so many people that are struggling on so many different levels. I've had some great guests. I don't know what it is. It must be something in the air. I've had two guests talk about suicide. I've had another guest that talked to me and our brains about what she says to people when she goes in after these mass shootings. And now I have you talking to us about grief, recovery, hospice, and palliative care. It's a lot going on, but people have to understand that this is a part of life. You know, death is like taxes. It's guaranteed, right?
That's the truth.
So tell my brains a little bit about you and your experience here on the planet.
It's quite a story. So I've been doing this work for just a little over 30 years, working with the dying and the grieving, and it has been absolutely amazing. You know, it wasn't my plan, but apparently it was in the plan, because this is where I ended up. And I'm so grateful for that, because I get to serve others. You know, I get to live a life of purpose and service, and who could ask for more, you know?
I know. Tell my brains a little bit about your history. People that don't know you and did not walk this walk with you, share that with them, please.
You mean way back or professional history?
Well, we'll start way back and then progression. I mean, you got more than a 30-second elevator speech and more than a book full. You got a catalog full of information.
There you go. Mom went out the door when I was 6 months old, never came back. Dad remarried when I was 2.5. And 6 months later, he and my stepmother placed me with a family so that they could work on their careers. And that family locked me in a pitch black closet, and that's where I lived for the next 3 years. Slept, ate, toileted, lived in that closet, dragged out once a day to be washed, physically tortured, and gang raped. And when I was 6, I was finally pulled out of that situation and was basically shattered. Went along and moved to the West Coast as a young teen, found drugs and alcohol, and they were a solution, not a problem. They probably kept me from suiciding. but made me stupid and led to bad decision making. And that decision making put me in front of a power greater than myself, and slammed the gavel down on my first charge ever and sent me off to the penitentiary. And I thought I was a tough guy, street brawler from the streets of New York. And here I was in California, and my first charge, first incarceration ever. And I lasted 5 hours before I was gang raped for the first time. And it happened throughout my incarceration. And I'll say that when I got out, I was broken spiritually, emotionally, physically. I was filled with bitterness and blame and rage and shame and guilt and self-hate and irresponsibility and cowardice. I was not a vision for you. And went right back to the lifestyle, but also went to school and got a lot of letters after my name. And fast forward, I was associate director of medical research at a well-known children's hospital, and had an impressive business card and a nice car and a beautiful wife at home and a lovely apartment. And I didn't think I could live one more day. I was in so much pain and consumed with self-hate and hopelessness and shame and guilt. And I planned my suicide. And on the day it was supposed to happen, I saw a public service announcement on the television, and it was short, but it said, if you've got a problem, call this number. And I did, and 90 minutes later, I was in a 12-step meeting, one of the anonymous fellowships. And in that meeting, I felt the breath of a God in whom I did not believe, blowing on me with a gentleness that I did not deserve, that I had not earned. And I've been clean and sober ever since. And that was amazing. And my wife, Nancy, and I didn't have children. We didn't hate them, but we didn't like them. And so I was very alcoholic in that there I am working at a children's hospital. Crazy. And on my third day sober, I walked into a meeting in West Hollywood, California, at a little old log cabin in the middle of West Hollywood, California. And somebody greeted me and said, honey, if you leave your fantasies at the door, all of your dreams can come true in Alcoholics Anonymous if you're willing to work for them. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even know there was a difference between fantasies and dreams. And I realized it in that moment. And after the meeting, I went into work and quit. And I went downtown to County Hospital and got a job as a cancer nurse for 10 or 11 months, and then a pain nurse on the pain service for about a year. And then I made the leap to hospice and palliative care. And that's what I've done ever since. I go bedside with the dying in their homes, wherever those homes might be, a cardboard box on Skid Row or a mansion in Pacific Palisades overlooking the ocean, and anything in between. And I help people die more tenderly. I help grievers grieve more gently. And I'm honored to get to do the pain management, the symptom control, the grief counseling, and the spiritual counseling. So that's kind of my story. And along the way, I've been recognized for the work that I do. I've won a slew of awards. I've recently written a book that is newly out called Compassionate Journeys, Lessons from My Work with the Dying. It's a book that is in the narrative style of Native Americans. It's 28 standalone stories, each one illustrating a powerful tool for co-journeying with the dying and the grieving. So I think that's well over 30 seconds, but that's my story. Okay. And I'm sticking to it.
I know, and you're messing up my makeup because it brings me to tears. I remember you telling me something in our first conversation. I said, Jay, how did you survive all of that? You said, well, I was built and made to suffer. I had never heard anything that heavy and that deep, and I carry that in my heart because that is something to be built for. So many of us give up, give out, give in, and you stuck to it, and you're helping others. So you're a registered nurse, and you have survived all this trauma. You had a wonderful monogamous marriage after all of the trauma. You love Miss Nancy. You said,
Absolutely.
I know it still brings a twinkle to your eye. You got her on the cover of your book. What was that like when you found true love? How did that feel?
Like a thunderbolt. I don't know the age of your audience, but
14 to 84.
so there was a movie, there was a book, and Paramount Pictures bought it and made the greatest gangster movie ever made, The Godfather, one of the greatest movies ever made. And in that movie, an attempt is made on the head gangster's life, and while he's wounded, he's not killed. And his son, who was not going to go into the gangster business, decides to avenge his father's death. He kills the gangster who tried to kill his dad and the crooked cop that was there to protect the gangster. He flees to Sicily, and he's out walking in Sicily, and he sees Apollonia, this beautiful woman, and it's amore prima vista, love at first sight. And they're inseparable from right then until her death. And basically, that's my story. Except for the gangster part and the Sicily part. But other than that,
So
there was
you were
a
a gangster.
party.
You was ride or die, and just in a different form.
There's a party in Pacific Palisades Friday night. I'm there, and about 1 a.m, my friend comes up with a little blonde and says, "Nancy, this is Jay, Nancy. She wants to walk on the beach. It's not safe at night, even in the Palisades. Go with her." And we took the footbridge over Pacific Coast Highway. We came down onto that beach. We walked and talked for 5 hours. And the sun came up, and it was amore prima noche. Not love at first sight, but love at first night. And we were inseparable from that next morning until she died. And May 1st, 2012 was our 42nd wedding anniversary. And 11 weeks later to the day, she died in my arms in our home on hospice with pancreatic cancer. And broke my heart, just broke my heart. The ground went out from under me. She died with 23 and a half years clean and sober. And we had gotten loaded together, and then we got sober together. Me first, but her 90 days behind me.
Wow.
And it was an amazing marriage. And
Wow.
just so honorable and honoring and passionate and compassionate and playful and curious and courageous and respectful and loving. And she was an incredibly beautiful woman. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, look at her. Oh my gosh, she's stunning. She looks like a model.
Yeah, she was the kind of beautiful that people would look at her, and then they'd look at me, and then they'd look at her, and then just shake their head and go, "He must be so rich," and I'm not. But I loved her, and she loved me. So
I want to jump into the work that you do. Your wife died in your arms, and you are a person that, again, you said that you will give hospice or palliative care to someone that is in a cardboard box. Death is inevitable. All of us are going to, as my mama say, get a turn at the wheel. How do we not spiral out of control? How do we deal with death and dying?
The simple and truest answer, though not universally true, but for most people, the answer is consistently with how they've lived as an adult. People who are aggressive, mean, bullying, screaming, selfish, tend to die very angry deaths, often bitter and lonely. People who are nervous, they've never taken risks, they've always avoided that, never found their courage. They tend to die very fearfully. And some people die with great grace because that tends to be how they've lived, and with some curiosity. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's a quick joke about the two identical twins who have co-journeyed their entire life, and it's coming time for the transition, and they're fighting. And the one said, bickering, and the one says, I'm terrified because I think there's nothing out there but cold and darkness and nothing. And the other one says, you're crazy. It's bright and warm and filled with opportunity. And they're back and forth, and suddenly they're interrupted by a baritone voice saying, push, push. And the first one comes down the birth canal and is born. And the second one comes. And usually when people hear that story, they're thinking two old men in their 90s who are getting ready to die. And it's not. It's identical twins who've co-journeyed their entire 9 months of gestation, are about to be born. But one thinking that it's going to be horrible and cold and empty, and the other thinking it'll be bright and warm and full, and it'll probably turn out exactly like that. And that's pretty similar at the other end, at death, that you go into it with the same attitudes and behaviors that you've brought into most of your adult life. So there's consistency more than anything else.
Well, I'm not ready to go, but I'm probably going to dance a jig, okay? Because life is good to me.
There you go.
Good to me. You know, there's a lot of fear associated with that. There's a lot of people blaming, you know, why the victimization, why me, why my child, why my husband, why cancer. You know, it's no favorites. We're all going to go at one point or another. So when you're dealing with this and you're dealing with this person's internal struggle, and you have the family, how do you work with the family to help them settle into this new realization that their family member is going to expire? What are some of the things that we should say? What are some of the things that we should know for our family members as they make this transition?
You know, it really varies person to person. I use some tools. One of them is reframing. I had a young woman, a young couple, married, Catholic, very Catholic, pregnant with their first child. And they were told at about 5 months into the pregnancy that this child had a heart defect that would take his life within hours to days of being born. And they said, do you want to terminate the pregnancy? And they decided not to, and to carry it to full term. I was never notified until she was wheeled in to deliver a full-term infant on a Tuesday evening. And I worked with them for a little bit Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, and Friday they all went home, the baby and the mom and dad, with pediatric hospice. And the next day the baby died, just having been held and loved and sung to his entire very brief life. But mom had said to me on Thursday, she asked if we could go out in the hallway and talk, and she whirled and, half screaming, half sobbing, went, why would God take my baby, my only baby? He must hate me, and I hate him. And then she just decompensated into a puddle of tears. And I waited, and then I gave her a reframing. I led with a defense-lowering statement and said, I could be wrong. Now it was safe for her to listen to me. I could be wrong, but is it possible that it's the heart defect taking your baby's life, and God will be there to receive him. And at a time when she most needed her God, instead of being in this adversarial, hateful relationship, she was back in a loving relationship. And to this day, I don't know if in academic Catholicism, God takes and God receives, or disease takes and God receives. And it doesn't matter, because I said I could be wrong, and is it possible?
Right.
So giving people another way to tell the story, another way to look at the situation, can be invaluable. There's also a tool called third partying. So I was working with an NFL quarterback who had brain cancer, and he was moving pretty quickly to death. He had a 10-year-old daughter and a lovely wife. And he woke up one morning, and I guess the cancer had grown in a direction within his brain that affected his right side, and he had a flaccid paralysis now. He couldn't make a fist, he couldn't lift his hand or his arm, he couldn't move his right leg, and he fell into a very deep depression filled with a sense of uselessness and self-hate. And I asked him if your daughter, she loved playing soccer and was really good, I said, if she continued to play soccer and got a full scholarship to college, and then was hit by a car and had her leg amputated and could no longer play soccer, would you look at her as useless? And he said, oh, yeah, I got it. I said, no, that wasn't a rhetorical question. Would you look at her as useless? And he said, absolutely not. I said, what would you say to her? And I pushed him to come up with the actual words that he would speak to her, and then challenged him on whether or not he was being hypocritical to be willing to speak to her like that and still see value in her while choosing to not see it in himself.
Right.
So it varies from situation to situation, from person to person.
Right.
I always encourage people to deliver previously undelivered significant emotional statements, not just I love you, but I am so sorry that I ... and I forgive you for ... And I don't know if I ever said how proud I was when you ... or how much I appreciated the way you always, that those things need to be said so that we don't live with the woulda, coulda, shoulda, and if onlys.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, because I had to do it. Okay. I had to do it. I want to ask you too about secrets. You know, you have some very compelling stories about how people have lived their entire lives with secrets that they have not shared, that they have not revealed, things that they have done. What do you say to the dying on how to reveal those and to set their spirit free?
I encourage them. I remind them of one of the things I was told in AA, which was you're as sick as your secrets. And I'm there with a listening ear and a caring heart. And I had an interesting case, and I offered to listen because I knew the family thought this man was in great pain, physical pain, and he had cancer, but I had his pain controlled, but he was vocalizing, he was screaming out. There was an agony about him, and the patterns of when he was or wasn't screaming didn't follow the physical pain path. And so I knew there was something emotional or spiritual, existential going on. And I asked the family if I could just sit with him. And they said, yeah, and if you're going to be here, we're going to go do some errands. And they left. And I sat with him, and he was an Orthodox Jew and very dedicated to family. He was a college professor. And I asked him if I was wrong in thinking that there was something internal that was emotional or spiritual. And he asked again, is my family gone? And I said, yes. And he said, okay, so here's what's going on. And for 15 years, he'd led a double life and been in the gay baths, just having anonymous, passionate sex. And he loved his family. And he didn't consider himself gay. He considered himself bisexual, but he was filled with shame and guilt about leading this double life, and didn't feel he could talk to his rabbi, because his rabbi, he said, I don't trust him to keep it confidential, and I obviously can't tell my wife. And I offered it, do you want to tell me? And he had told me the story after swearing me to silence. You promise you won't tell anybody? And I said, yes. And he told me, and he thought he was going to go back. That was the other reason he didn't want to tell his rabbi. His rabbi would make him stop doing it. And so he wouldn't tell him. And I knew his cancer was going to be what made him stop doing it. There was no going back. He was not. So then I ended up with this horrible ethical dilemma of what if he's caught a disease in that behavior and has transmitted it to his wife, who has no idea. And so she's not getting tested, and maybe the disease is growing and progressing in her, and she needs to know, but I promised him that I wouldn't. And I went to a physician friend of mine, a woman who was an ethicist, a bioethicist. And I said, I've got an ethical dilemma.
What is a bioethicist?
It's a physician who deals with ethical decisions in healthcare. What are the principles, the ethical principles that we can apply to this situation to make a decision about whether to do A or B?
Wow.
And she listened to the story, and she said, I have an opinion ethically, but why don't I give you advice as a pragmatist, as practical advice rather than ethical advice? Why don't you just have them run an STD, sexually transmitted disease panel on his blood? You've already got some of his blood here at the hospital. Just have him run. If there's no disease, then there's no reason to tell his wife. And if there is a disease, then we can look at the ethical principles. And we ran the blood, and he was disease-free other than his cancer. And so I kind of dodged a bullet of having to make a tough ethical decision, and instead made a practical decision to honor my word to him, to keep in confidence what he had told me, but to do so knowing that his wife was safe. And he died a short time later. And I ended up doing grief recovery work with his wife. And what was so interesting was she knew. She knew what he had done. She knew how long he had done it. And what broke her heart was that he had never found the courage and the trust to tell her. Wow. And share that part of it. She didn't judge him. She said, we're all human, we have our frailties, but she knew, and he lived with such agony about his secret, and it wasn't a secret.
Wow. You talked about him being of Jewish faith. Talk to us a little bit about cultures. I mean, you're dealing with every culture, religious faith, spiritual faith, and it's different. Some find death honorable, some, it just covers the gamut. Tell us a little bit about your work when you're faced with that, because you're dealing with everybody on the planet.
Yeah. And particularly in today's PC, politically correct world, there's such emphasis on cultural diversity and cultural misappropriation and being culturally sensitive and being culturally appropriate. Um, and I think that's all a good thing. But I don't treat cultures. I treat individuals. So
Okay.
when I'm old enough that I learned in nursing school, I'll give you an example, that with Asians, elderly Asians, you never tell them their diagnosis or their prognosis, what's wrong with them and what the outcome might be. You tell the eldest son. And if there is no eldest son, you tell the eldest daughter. And that is across the board. Okay, that's what I learned. Then this wonderful woman, physician, researcher, Leslie Blackhall, did a landmark study published in I think it was the New England Journal of Medicine, maybe Journal of the American Medical Association. And she had studied 800 ethnic elders in LA on this very question. And here's what she found, that 90% of the blacks and whites, 55% of the Korean Americans, and 35% of the Mexican Americans wanted honest information given directly to them about what was wrong and how it might turn out, not given to their families. And yet, I was trained in school that you never tell an elderly Asian what's wrong with them. And then over half wanted it. And when I tell that, I lecture at schools of medicine and schools of nursing, and I, in more detail, tell them about that study. And I say, is it useful? And they all say, yes. And I say, no, it's not. It's interesting, but it's not useful, because if I have a black patient, how do I know if that black patient is in the 90% who do want or the 10% who do not want information given to them about what's wrong?
Right.
And then I'll say, it's not rhetorical. How do I know? And the answer is, you ask the patient. Always. That I don't treat blacks or Asians or whites or Mexican Americans, or I treat individuals. And so I'll say to them in a way that presents choices and normalizes them. Many of my patients want this information given to them, while many of my other patients would prefer that information be given to their families. Into which of those two groups do you fall? Now it's safe for them to say A or B, because many patients A while many B. So they don't have to feel weird if they choose this or that.
Right. And they don't want to subject their family to any, to any grief or pain. I know that my brother, uh, I didn't realize how serious he was and that he was about to die until I go in there and the nurse says, we're going to be transferring him to hospice. And never gave us, we thought he had one thing, ended up having something totally different. And he would always give this strange eye movement and don't give any information. But that is his right. He is responsible for that. And so many people want to take control. There's a couple quick questions that I want to ask you really quick. Power of directive when it comes to medical. Please emphasize to my brains how important that is. So many people think, oh, okay, if I give you control, you're going to pull the plug on me. They're going to do everything they can to, resuscitate you if that's what you want. But how important is it to have that document and those have that conversation with your family prior to? You don't even have to be sick. Okay, you can have that conversation with somebody tomorrow, because you can unfortunately be hit by a bus. People know what you want.
We all see on the news, 19-year-old college student riding a bicycle or jogging, hit by a car and now in a coma. and it's tragic. And people think, well, I'm young, I'm healthy, I don't have any disease. I don't need to do that. You need to do that. So here's what it is. It's got different names in different states, different documents are recognized, but you can go to the California Medical Association or Arizona or Missouri Medical Association, and they'll have the form there. You can download it for free for whatever is legal in your state. And it's essentially, it's a durable power of attorney for healthcare where you give another person, and usually a backup person, so you name two people, who can communicate your wishes when you are no longer able to. Not their wishes, your wishes. And so you need to have a conversation with them and say, I want everything done. If it can give me one more day, one more hour, one more minute, I want machines and breathing machines and tubes, or under no circumstances. I don't want to die in a hospital. I don't want to be hooked up to a breathing machine. I don't want tubes. I want to be in my home with my dog at the foot of the bed, with family around, with every sight and sound being familiar. I don't want a hospital and anything in between. But you have to specify and you have to tell them. You then put it in writing in that document so that they are reminded what your wishes are, not what they think is right. And then you don't put it in a drawer. You give them a copy, you give family a copy, you give your doctor a copy, so that as many people as possible, you can get the little medical alert bracelets or pendants that say, my durable power of attorney for healthcare is John and his phone number, or
Right.
Sally and her phone number.
And also people need to be aware that for organ donors, you need to also, put that, if that's your wish, that you want to, donate your eyes or your liver or your kidney if it's functionable, great. And if you don't want it, you need to let people know that as well.
Absolutely.
Tell people, what is hospice? Hospice is a philosophy. People think that that is a form of treatment, but it is more than that. I was fortunate enough to meet one of the founders of hospice care here in San Diego, California, and it was amazing. Please explain to my brains the difference between hospice and palliative care.
Yeah. Palliative care is a bigger umbrella, and hospice fits under it. So palliative care comes from the word to palliate, meaning to reduce. So the idea of palliative care is that we reduce suffering, physical, emotional, and spiritual suffering, and it can be delivered while we continue to pursue curative, aggressive treatment. So giving somebody who's getting chemotherapy an anti-nausea drug would be palliative. Giving somebody who is getting chemotherapy and has physical pain from their cancer, giving them pain medication is palliative. Within that umbrella, there's a kind of care called hospice, and it's a philosophy more than anything that says, I'm finished with curative treatment. I'm tired of being in a hospital. I'm tired of being thought of as the body part of the disease, the heart in room 7 or the cancer in room 8. I just want to go home. I want to be kept comfortable. I want pain medicine, nausea medicine, fatigue medicine, whatever is I might need. I want to be treated like a human being. And I don't want anything done that would prolong my life. And I don't want anything done that would shorten my life. I want it to just run its natural course and be comfortable. The difference is that while you're on hospice, which is paid for by almost all third-party payers, Medicare, Medi-Cal, Medicaid, Kaiser, Blue Shield, Aetna, Humana, all of them pay for hospice. While you're on hospice, they will not simultaneously pay for curative treatment. And often, but the way hospice is created, you can go on and off hospice. Sometimes people go home, they're from the hospital, they're on hospice for 3 weeks, and they start feeling better because of this loving care. And they'll say, I feel pretty good. I want to go on a trip. Or they may say, I feel pretty good. I'm going to go off hospice and go back and try a little more chemo or radiation. And then if that doesn't work, they can come back on hospice and they can go off and they can come back. So it is a type of care that is focused, hospice is solely on keeping people comfortable and at home as they approach the end of their life. This is for people who have a terminal diagnosis and 6 or fewer months to live.
Okay. I have some girlfriends. One, my neighbor next door, she wants to be a hospice care provider. I didn't understand it. And then I was in a situation where I dealt with someone that was dying, and it was the most beautiful, loving, warm experience I have ever felt in my life. To coach someone, it's like being a doula or a midwife to the dying. You're helping them transition. You are there to wipe their brows or to, and sometimes they want their nails painted. Sometimes they just want someone to talk to. Sometimes they just want somebody to sit there. And you're holding space with them while they make this transition, and they're trusting you and their family is trusting you. It is an amazing experience. I never really thought about it that way, but it is really a gift, and it takes a special kind of person to do that. There's something else that you taught me about. People say that there are these stages of grief. What is it, 5 or 7 stages of grief? You said there's really no such thing. Explain that to my brains.
Correct. Well, when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote her book, she had done a study, and she said these are stages that people go through when they are first told that they have a terminal illness and are dying. And she was pretty clear that it wasn't about grievers. And she said it's also not everybody will go through every stage, and not everybody will go through them in order. And they may be in more than one stage at the same. Well, that's not really stages. And it wasn't for grievers. But when daytime talk television hosts got a hold of this idea, they made it about grievers. And so to this day, people go, oh, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Those are the 5 stages. Scientific study done, and it was published in Scientific American, November 2008, that completely debunked the stages of grief. Well, actually, stage theory in general, but specifically the stages of grief, that they don't exist. They're not stages. More importantly than that, they're intellectual. So when you're grieving, you have a broken heart. And to be told, yeah, you're probably not doing this right because you're angry, and yet you haven't done any bargaining, so you're off schedule, you're doing it out of order, and people will come to me and say, I think I'm doing this wrong because I haven't had denial yet, but I'm so depressed, and shouldn't I be angry first? And so they're worried cognitively, intellectually, that they're grieving incorrectly, when grief, in fact, is the most unique of all of the emotions in its presentation, its duration, its style, its intensity, its presentation. And so we don't find it helpful to talk about the stages of grief. And on top of that, we have a culture that teaches us terrible tools for grieving, just tools that don't work. It's like handing somebody a can of paint and a hammer, screwdriver, and saw and say, paint this room. Well, these are good tools, but not for painting.
Right.
And those tools include things like don't feel and replace the loss. Those two are usually paired. So you're 6 years old and your puppy dies and somebody says, well, don't feel bad. Don't cry. On Saturday, we'll get you a new one. And then you're 9 years old and somebody steals your bicycle and you're crying and dad says, don't cry, don't feel bad. On Saturday, we'll get you a new one. And then you're 11 years old and your little heart goes pitter patter because you've fallen in puppy love for the first time. Mine was Pamela. We had a relationship that spanned 2 or 3 days. I knew we were in a relationship. I don't know if she did, but I knew it was over when I saw her with Jimmy Rao walking across the playground. And I went home with that look, and Mom said, don't feel bad. There are plenty of fish in the sea, which is the puppy love version of replace the loss. That's not useful. And we grow up thinking, and then what do we do when someone dies? Because you can't replace the loss.
Right.
And then we're told, stay busy and give it time and compare the loss. Well, I know somebody who had 3 of her children die. You only lost 1. You should be grateful. So we're telling people, don't grieve. Let me minimize it. Let me discount it. Let me dismiss it by having you compare it to somebody whose losses are greater.
Wow.
But grief isn't quantitative. It's always felt at 100%. If this woman has 2 children die and this woman has 1 child die, the first woman's not hurting twice as much. They're both hurting at 100%. Right. So the idea of comparing the loss, giving it time. I'll sit in a room with 100 physicians that are mature and say, how many of you have a loss over which you feel profound sadness, and that loss is more than 25 years old? And every hand goes up. So if time heals all wounds, why are those hands going up?
Right.
So those are the tools that our culture gives us. And then we say crazy things to children like, well, grandpa's just sleeping. And they've seen the body at the viewing, and now they're terrified of going to sleep at night.
Right.
Or we'll tell them only the good die young. And so now they go, oh my God, if I'm good, I'm going to die. And they start acting out and developing behavior problems.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy what we tell people. And we'll say, well, you should be grateful you had him so long. Well, I am, but that doesn't.
Right.
I can be grateful and grieving. The one doesn't help with the other. So or women who have a stillborn child and are told, be grateful you're so young, you can have another, as though children are completely replaceable.
Right.
And I shouldn't even grieve this one. You're already talking about replace. Does that make sense?
Give us some replacements. What are some of the things that we should say?
Well,
people always say, I sent a card, but I don't know what to say. What do you say?
That's what you say. You tell the truth. The best thing you can say is, I can't imagine what this loss must be like for you. And I wish I had words, but I don't. I just want you to know I'm here. if you'd like to talk, I can listen. Would you be comfortable with my going in and putting a load of laundry in for you, or making the bed, or vacuuming the house? Can I walk the dog for you? Would you be interested in telling me the 3 funniest memories you have of your brother? Because most grievers want to talk. They want to talk about the person who died. But the truth is, I can't imagine. And most of us say, I know exactly how you feel. No, you don't. So tell people the truth. I can't imagine what this must be like for you. I have no words, but I'm here. I can listen.
And before we conclude, 2 quick questions I want to ask you. One is, what do you say to children? 3 questions. 1, what do you say to children? 2, how do you get over the anger? You're still angry. And 3, what do we say when someone is spontaneously taken away from us? These mass shootings, hit by a car, gang violence. What do we say to those grievers?
Okay. So children are so much exposed to so much more today. They don't have the innocence and the buffer that they used to have growing up around death. So you always start with their experience. And they've almost all had a goldfish die, a pet die. You can talk about the fact that the warm, loving, fun part of this person is no longer here. But I'm stunned at how articulate children are about death. They know about death because they've seen on the internet, they've seen on TV, they've seen in the news, and children die amazingly well. Their parents are on the floor, but I'll walk into a dying child's presence, and the first thing they say to me is, I'm dying. Do you know that? Do you know I'm dying? It's like, yes, I do. So let's talk about that. So they have a sense, but they're egocentric, and so they're always worried about how it affects them. So they tend to ask again and again and again, how did mommy die? She had cancer. Now, what's cancer? Well, it's when cells grow really fast and they create a mass, kind of like a baseball or softball, and that pushes on other organs. So that, what are organs? And then you go through that and go through that, and then they cry a little bit, and then they'll suddenly go, I want some peanut butter. And they've made a 180-degree turn on a dime, and I'm still back at, back there. And then a couple hours later, they come and goes, where's mommy? And you have to be willing to go through it again, because they're picking it like a baby, picking up a rattle and turning it over and putting it down and picking it up and putting it in their mouth. They're trying to get it, and they keep asking. And our job is to keep answering in simple terms and with great love and reassurance and patience.
Okay.
And then the next question was what?
The next question was, how do we get over the anger? That people die.
Through grief recovery. The grief recovery process was created 40 years ago. It's a set of steps. It started in West Hollywood, California, and today it's in Australia, New Zealand, all of North America, Scandinavia, UK, Europe, and Africa, and just recently started being introduced in Asia. In 40 years, it's gone worldwide. So people can certainly contact me, and I can put them in touch with a trained and certified grief recovery specialist in their area that can either in a one-on-one or a group take them through this simple set of steps that lead to transformation of depth and weight, a lasting transformation that allows them to re-engage with life and to be free of the pain. Right. They may still have some grief and sadness, but the pain and the debilitation and the I can't focus, concentrate, remember, I have no playfulness or energy or spontaneity, I can't stop sleeping or I can't stop eating, or that goes away, all of that, and they are able to re-engage life. So the grief recovery process is powerful, and I can hook people up literally around the globe if they have a need or they know someone who has a need, and they can reach me on Facebook through you, or on Facebook just at Jay Westbrook, or my email is compassionate journey without the S, just compassionate journey at hotmail.com, compassionate journey at hotmail.com.
And Brains, what you have to understand is that forgiveness is for you. You have to learn to forgive. You know, I used to hear that term all the time, and I'm like, yeah, right. You know, you have to forgive the other person, but you really have to do that, because that is what is going to open up your space and give you capacity to continue to live, to continue to grow. And one last question I want to ask: what do we say to people that have a spontaneous loss? You know, one thing that you had said, and I read in your book, is that, you know, people feel guilty. I didn't get there in time before, you know, the plane didn't land, or I didn't make that last phone call, or I wasn't in the room. I stepped out for a second. You said that sometimes the individuals need that space to make that transition, the person that's dying, and you know, it's a part of the divine plan, and we have to be okay with that. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. Certainly, if someone is in the hospital and you step out to make a quick call or run and pee, and you come back and in that 90 seconds they've died, then I will often tell people, you know, they loved you so much that they were unable to let go when you were right here. And so you gave them a tremendous gift by stepping out. That's different than someone who dies, they're at work and they have a sudden heart attack, or they're in a car accident, or the victim of violence, whether it's individual or mass violence. And with those people, we don't start the grief work right away. We're more likely to do something called debriefing, which is they're trying to understand what happened. So we need to be the heart with ears. Tell me what happened this morning. What's your understanding of what happened when he was in that hospice situation? What were the last words that he spoke to you? Tell me what he was like, so that you're trying to just get them talking. And I went back to New York right after 9/11. 10 days later, I flew back and then spent a couple months supposedly doing grief counseling there, but much more of it was debriefing. People weren't able to do the grief work yet. They were just trying to make sense of what happened.
Right, get their head around it.
You know, he always runs late, but he didn't that morning. And so he was there, and yet our neighbor works at the same place, and he stopped to get donuts for people, and so he wasn't in the building when it's the enormity of it takes, again, just like a baby with a rattle, picking it up, turning it over, tasting it, looking at it, putting it down, picking it back. And so that's what you're doing initially with those people. Talk to me about the experience. What did that feel like? How did you find out? What were you told? What, so that they can be with the rattle. And does
Well,
that, yeah.
it makes sense, and I'm so glad that you have taken, you know, all of this time. Your life's work has been dedicated to helping people make this transition. Because Brains, I believe it's a transition. I don't think that this life ends with a period. I think it's a comma, and we are going to continue on to the next level, to the next universe, to the next space. You know, it is what it is. And we have to be able to live with knowing that death and dying is going to occur, whether it be sudden, spontaneous, a long-term illness. We want you to be well. We want you to be healthy. We want you to connect with people like my great guest, Jay Westbrook. I love you to the moon and back. I really do. Brains, I want you to go and pick up a copy of Compassionate Journeys, Lessons from My Work with the Dying. This is filled with all kinds of great stories and wealth and wisdom. You can pick it up on Amazon. You can contact Jay. Jay has a host of other people that he works with regards to grief counseling, directing you on maybe how to get information on palliative care, hospice care. He's just wonderful. And I'm so glad that he is a brain and he has been able to help me and, you know, just pick up the phone. I just love to hear the sound of his voice. Okay. It's wonderful and it's compassionate. Thank you so much for being here on the edge. I honor you.
And I honor you.
And again, what do you always end with? In love and service.
As always, in love and service, Jay.
Yes, Jay. So, Brains, I'm going to put all of his information there so that you can contact him. Please follow us on Blog Talk, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all over the planet. Okay? Know that we are here for you. Thank you again, Jay.
Love you.
I
Thank
love
you
you too.
so much.
All right, Brains, continue to live. Bye-bye.